Hollywood has always sparkled with dreams, but behind the camera lights, some of its brightest stars left their families in the shadows. Fame is heavy, and sometimes the cost of keeping the world entertained was breaking the hearts of the very children they once held. For decades, the golden age of Hollywood sold the image of perfect homes, smiling stars, and fairy tale lives. But inside those gated mansions, family bonds were often the first thing to snap under the pressure. Some stars simply walked away from their children in pursuit of careers, others publicly denied they were even parents, and a few legally disowned their kids entirely. Here are 17 vintage Hollywood stars who disowned their children. Their names are legendary, but their private choices left scars that fame could never erase. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford was one of Hollywood's most glamorous and enduring stars, known for sheer elegance, determination, and unforgettable roles in films like Mildred Pierce. But behind the image of perfection, her private life as a mother was far more complicated and often heartbreaking. Crawford was unable to have biological children, so she adopted 4, Christina, Christopher, and twin girls Kathy and Cindy. In the public eye, she appeared to be the perfect devoted mother, frequently photographed with her children in matching outfits, presenting a picture of warmth and domestic bliss. But according to her eldest daughter, Christina, the reality was very different. Christina later revealed that life in the Crawford home was strict, cold, and dominated by appearances. She claimed that her mother's love felt conditional, tied to obedience and perfection. Public image mattered more than private comfort, and the children often felt more like accessories to a Hollywood star than members of a nurturing family. The most shocking moment came after Joan's death in 1907. In her will, she famously disinherited Christina and her brother Christopher, leaving them nothing for reasons which are well known to them. Christina's memoir, Mommy Dearest, and the subsequent film adaptation painted a haunting picture of a childhood overshadowed by emotional distance and fear. While Joan Crawford's legacy as an actress remains legendary, her story as a parent is a reminder that fame and family do not always align. The woman adored by the world for her talent and glamour left behind children who felt unseen in the glow of Hollywood's spotlight. Tony Curtis. Tony Curtis was one of the most charismatic leading men of the 1950s and 1960s, adored for films like Some Like It Hot and Spartacus. Curtis was married 6 times and had 6 children, including actress Jamie Lee Curtis. To the public, he was the proud Hollywood father, photographed at events and family outings, but behind the cameras, his relationships with his children were complicated and distant. Fame and personal struggles often pulled him away, leaving some of his kids feeling like strangers to the man the world adored. The deepest wound came in 2010, just months before his death. Tony Curtis quietly changed his will, cutting out all of his children completely. The man who had once been the center of their world left them nothing, not a single dollar, not even a symbolic keepsake from his glamorous life. Everything went to his 6th and final wife, Jill Vandenberg Curtis, who was decades younger. When the will became public, his children were devastated. Jamie Lee Curtis later hinted that the family had long endured his emotional distance, but the legal erasure still hit like a final rejection. For children who grew up under the shadow of Hollywood lights, it wasn't the money that hurt most, it was the message that their father had turned his back on them in the end. Tony Curtis's story is one of classic Hollywood charm, but also of fractured bonds and unhealed wounds. His name will forever shine in movie history, yet for his children, that legacy carries lasting. Behind the handsome face and iconic roles was a father whose last act left his family feeling abandoned, reminding the world that fame and fortune can sometimes cost the people closest to you the most. Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando was one of Hollywood's most electrifying stars, a man whose performances in A Streetcar, Named Desire, and The Godfather made him a legend. Brando had 11 children, both biological and adopted, but he was never the image of a stable father. His personal life was chaotic, filled with broken relationships and scandal. His children grew up in the shadow of his fame, often describing a father who was distant, complicated, and unpredictable. Yet nothing could have prepared some of them for the final act of his life, the moment he cut them out completely. When Marlon Brando died in 2004, the The reading of his will sent a shockwave through his sprawling family. His adopted daughter Petra Brando Corval and his grandson Tuki Brando, the son of his troubled daughter Cheyenne, were completely disinherited. Brando's multi-million-dollar estate was distributed to his other children and associates, but for Petra and Tuki, there was nothing, not a single dollar, not even a keepsake from the man who defined their family name. For Petra, who had once been close to him as a child, the rejection was bitter. For Tuki, the pain carried an even heavier weight. His mother, Cheyenne, had taken her own life after years of turmoil and heartbreak in the Brando family. Being erased from his grandfather's legacy felt like the final abandonment, a cold reminder that in the world of the Hollywood elite, love was often conditional. Marlon Brando's name will forever shine in cinematic history, his face immortalized on the silver screen. But for the children he left behind, that legend is a ghost that haunts more than it inspires. The world saw a brilliant actor. Two of his own saw a father and grandfather who, in the end, turned his back and left them standing outside the gates of his fame, empty-handed and heartbroken. Jerry Lewis. Jerry Lewis was once America's clown prince of comedy, a beloved entertainer who lit up the screen in classics like The Nutty Professor and The Bellboy. His goofy charm and tireless energy made millions laugh, but behind the jokes and the fame, his private life told a far sadder story, one his own children would carry for the rest of their lives. Lewis married singer Patty Palmer in 1904, and together they had 6 sons. When Lewis divorced Patty in 1980, the family fractured. Several of his sons struggled with the emotional aftermath, feeling abandoned by a father who was now focused on a new life with his second wife, Sandy Pitnick. For years, there were brief reunions and long silences, but the final blow didn't come until after his death in 2017. Jerry Lewis's will became public, and it was a shock to the children of his first marriage. All 6 sons were explicitly disinherited. He left them nothing, not a penny, not a memento of the father they once adored from afar. Every bit of his estate went to his second wife and their adopted daughter. For the sons he left behind, the disinheritance was more than financial. It was a final, public rejection. After years of feeling like outsiders in their father's glamorous world, the will confirmed what they had feared all along. Jerry Lewis had closed the door on them completely. On stage, he was the man who made the world laugh. But to 6 sons, he became a source of lifelong pain, a father whose last act was not a joke, but an erasure. Behind the laughter of Hollywood's favorite kunun was a family left heartbroken, carrying the weight of a name that gave them nothing in the end. Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin was the silent film genius who made the world laugh without saying a word. His Little Tramp character became a global icon, and his legacy as one of Hollywood's greatest pioneers is undeniable. But while audiences adored him, Chaplin's relationships with his children were often complicated, marked by distance, scandal, and emotional gaps. Chaplin married 4 times and had 11 children, but his early family life was turbulent. His first major scandal came in the 1940s, when aspiring actress Joan Barry accused him of fathering her child. Chaplin denied paternity, but a jury ordered him to provide financial support despite blood tests suggesting otherwise. The public battle painted him as a man who was struggling to balance fame with personal responsibility. Even within his own home, being the child of Charlie Chaplin was not easy. His constant work, high-profile marriages, and eventual exile from the United States often kept him far from some of his children during their formative years. While he found stability in his final marriage to Una O'Neill, several of his older children grew up feeling that they lived in the shadow of a father the world loved, but they barely knew. In his later years, Chaplin tried to mend relationships, spending more time with his younger children in Switzerland. Yet, for many, the memories of absence and emotional distance lingered. The man who brought joy to millions struggled to fully connect at home, a bittersweet legacy of Astor who could make the whole world smile, but couldn't always give the same comfort to his own family. Bing Crosby. Bing Crosby's voice was the soundtrack of American comfort. His smooth, warm baritone defined the holidays with songs like White Christmas and filled theaters with joy. On screen, he often played the easygoing, fatherly figure everyone wished they had at home. But behind the charming performances, Crosby's real-life relationships with his first family were far more complicated and painful. Bing married actress Dixie Lee in 1930, and together they had four sons: Gary, Lindsay, Philip, and Dennis. While the world adored him, his boys grew up in a home that they later described as cold and strict. Gary Crosby, in his 1983 memoir, Going My Own Way, claimed that his father's approach to parenting was more authoritarian than affectionate. Praise was rare, punishments were harsh, and the emotional warmth people expected from the beloved crooner often wasn't there at home. The pressures of Crosby's career and his carefully maintained public image left little room for nurturing. He was constantly working on sets, on the radio, in recording studios, and touring. His sons often felt like they were living in the shadow of a man the world loved, but they could never fully reach. Tragically, the emotional distance had lasting consequences. Two of Bing's sons, Lindsay and Dennis, died by suicide as adults, leaving behind pain that seemed rooted in their fractured upbringing. Gary openly admitted that, while he respected his father's talent, he longed for a warmth that rarely came. Bing Crosby's legacy remains golden in music history. His voice still drifts through homes every December, offering a sense of comfort and nostalgia. Yet behind that timeless sound was a family who struggled with the silence of emotional absence. A reminder that even the most beloved figures can leave private heartache in their wake. Clark Gable. Clark Gable, famously crowned the King of Hollywood, captivated audiences with his charisma, rugged charm, and iconic role as Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind. To the world, he was the embodiment of masculine glamour, but for his daughter, Judy Lewis, Gable was a distant figure, a father who chose secrecy over a relationship. Judy Lewis was the result of Gable's affair with actress Loretta Young in the 1930s. At the time, Hollywood studios were strict, and a scandal like this could have ended both of their careers. To protect their reputations, Young quietly disappeared from the spotlight to have her baby and later arranged a staged adoption, presenting Judy as her legally adopted daughter. Gable did not publicly acknowledge his child, maintaining silence while the world adored him on screen. Growing up, Judy felt the absence. She noticed the whispers, the rumors, and even their semblance she shared with the famous actor. Yet she never received the open recognition or affection that a daughter longs for from her father. She later wrote about the pain of feeling hidden, living in a reality where her father belonged to the public, but never fully to her. It wasn't until adulthood that Judy officially learned the truth, confirming what her heart had long suspected. By then, Gable had already passed away, taking with him the chance for reconciliation. Clark Gable's legacy remains untouchable in Hollywood history, handsome, talented, and unforgettable. But for Judy Lewis, the story was much quieter and sadder. The King of Hollywood may have ruled the silver screen, but in private, his throne at home remained empty for the daughter he never openly claimed. Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney was one of the brightest stars of Hollywood's golden age. As a child actor, he charmed audiences in the Andy Hardy films and became one of MGM's most bankable talents. But behind the laughter and energy on screen, his personal life was chaotic, and his relationships with his children were often fractured. Rooney married 8 times and had 9 children. Yet, fame and personal struggles often pulled him away from family life. His demanding career started in early childhood, leaving him with little understanding of how to be a present parent. Several of his children later described their childhood as lonely, shaped by a father who was always chasing the next role or battling his own financial and emotional troubles. Rooney's life spiraled with gambling debts, failed marriages, and public scandals. The instability made consistent fatherhood nearly impossible. While some of his children reconnected with him later in life, others remained distant, feeling that the Hollywood star the world loved had rarely been there when they needed a dad. In his later years, Rooney spoke openly about regret. He admitted that the whirlwind of fame and poor choices cost him the closeness he once could have had with his children. His story is a reminder that the applause of the world can sometimes drown out the quiet voices at home, asking for love and attention. Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy Davis Jr. was the ultimate entertainer, a singer, dancer, and actor who broke racial barriers in the 1950s and 60s. As a member of the famous Rat Pack, he was constantly in the spotlight, performing in nightclubs, starring in films, and touring the world. But his dedication to his career often left his family life behind. Davis had 3 children, including his adopted son Mark, but fame kept him in motion. His children later recalled that they grew up in the shadow of a man who was always working, always on stage, and rarely home long enough to build a deep bond. For them, their father was a legend to the world, but a distant figure in private life. His relentless career, combined with struggles in his marriages and a busy social life, meant that fatherhood was often a role played at a distance. Sammy Davis Jr. loved his children, but the demands of being a groundbreaking star in a segregated industry pulled him in too many directions. Later in life, Davis tried to reconnect, but years of absence had left lasting scars, making it impossible. When he passed away in '90, he was remembered as a trailblazer and a world-class entertainer, but for his children, his legacy was also one of emotional distance. A father claimed by the stage, not the home. Hedy Lamarr. Hedy Lamarr was once called the most beautiful woman in the world. In the 1930s and 1940s, her face lit up Hollywood screens in films like Samson and Delilah and Algiers. To her adoring fans, she was a goddess of glamour, an untouchable icon. But to her adopted son, James Loder, she was a mother who disappeared long before the world ever knew it. Hedy adopted James as a baby, bringing him into a life that sparkled with premieres, photographers, and studio parties. But that glamorous world left little room for the quiet needs of a child. By the time James was 12, Hedy had sent him away to boarding school. It was the beginning of a lifetime of estrangement. He grew up feeling like a shadow, connected to a famous name, but never to a mother's love. As Hedy's fame faded and her life became quieter, her relationship with James never healed. Decades passed without meaningful contact. When the actress died in 2000, the final wound came in the form of her will. James was left with nothing. Not a dollar, not a photograph, not even the acknowledgement that he had once been her child. For James, the disinheritance was more than financial. It was emotional confirmation of the rejection he had lived with for decades. While the world remembers Hedy Lamarr as a screen siren and a brilliant inventor, her son remembers a life spent on the outside looking in. Anthony Quinn. Anthony Quinn was a force of nature on screen, with Academy Award-winning roles in Zorba the Greek and Viva Zapata. That made him a symbol of passion and vitality, but his family life was as turbulent as the characters he played, leaving some of his many children feeling like strangers to their own father. Quinn fathered more than a dozen children across multiple marriages and affairs, a web of relationships complicated by fame and ego. While the public admired his charisma and talent, his children often saw a man who was present in the headlines, but absent in the home. Several of his children would later describe growing up with the ache of a father who drifted in and out of their lives, leaving them craving his attention. The final betrayal came in the form of his will. When Quinn died in 2001, some of his children discovered that they had been excluded from his estate, receiving nothing from the man whose face was loved around the world. Legal battles erupted, and bitter feelings lingered as the children faced the painful truth. In their father's last act, he had chosen some of them and rejected others. For the children left out, it wasn't just about money, it was about validation. To be disinherited was to be told, even in death, that they were outsiders in their own family. Anthony Quinn's name lives on in film history, but for some of his children, it is a name that carries as much hurt as pride, a reminder that fame can fill a theater, but it can leave a home heartbreakingly empty. Joe Louis. Joe Louis, known as the Brown Bomber, was more than a heavyweight boxing champion. He was a national hero. In the 1930s and 40s, he broke racial barriers in the sport and became a symbol of hope for Black Americans. But while the world cheered his victories, his personal life was far more complicated. Louis had several children across multiple relationships, and his career kept him constantly on the move. The pressures of maintaining his public image, financial responsibilities, and his own personal struggles often left little room for stable family life. Several of his children would later speak about growing up feeling disconnected from their famous father. Financial mismanagement and tax troubles consumed Louis in his later years, and the stress further distanced him from his family. He reportedly felt guilt over the relationships he couldn't maintain. Yet he remained a figure admired by the public far more than he was known as a father in his own home. Joe Louis died in 1981, remembered as one of the greatest boxers in history. His legacy in sports remains untouchable, but for some of his children, he was the father they barely knew, a man claimed by history and the world before his own family could truly claim him. Bette Davis. Bette Davis was the queen of Hollywood's golden age, her fierce eyes and sharp tongue making her unforgettable in films like All About Eve and Jezebel. To audiences, she was elegant and powerful, a woman who seemed to control every room she entered, but for her daughter, Barbara B.D. Hyman, being Bette Davis's child, was a far lonelier experience than the public ever imagined. Betty raised B.D. in the world of flashing cameras and film sets, expecting her to fit into the glamorous life that Hollywood demanded. Davis was a perfectionist on screen and off, and her daughter often felt like she was performing just to win her mother's love. Years later, B.D. would write that her mother's world revolved around herself and her career, leaving little room for a daughter who longed for warmth and security. In 1985, the rift between mother and daughter became heartbreakingly public. B.D. released a memoir, My Mother's Keeper, detailing what she said was a lifetime of emotional neglect. The book shattered the image of the perfect Hollywood mother and infuriated Davis, who felt betrayed by her own child. The final chapter of their relationship came in Bette Davis's will. When the document was read after her death in 1989, it carried the coldness of a legal weapon. B.D. and her sister Margot were completely disinherited. Everything went to her son Michael Merrill and a close friend. For B.D., it was more than the loss of an inheritance. It was the final confirmation that she had been shut out of her mother's heart. Bette Davis's name will forever glitter in Hollywood history, her films studied and celebrated. But for her daughter, that glitter will always carry the sting of abandonment. Behind the glamour, the applause, and the Academy Awards was a little girl who grew into a woman still yearning for a mother's unconditional love, a love that never truly arrived. Lee Strasberg. Lee Strasberg was the father of method acting, the man behind the success of Marilyn Monroe, James Dean, and Al Pacino. To the acting world, he was a legend, but to his own children, Susan and Johnny Strasberg, he became a father who erased them from his life in the most painful way possible. When Lee died in 1982, the reading of his will stunned the family. The vast estate, including Marilyn Monroe's belongings that she had left to him, went entirely to his third wife, Anna Strasberg. His own children, both active in the acting world, were left with nothing. There were no tokens of love, no personal keepsakes, not even a gesture of acknowledgement. For Susan and Johnny, the disinheritance was not just financial, it was emotional abandonment made public. Their father had poured his legacy into students and the theater, but left his own blood on the outside looking in. The Strasberg name may have lived in Hollywood glory, but for his children, it carried the weight of betrayal and a father who chose his legend over his family. Oleg Cassini. Oleg Cassini was the designer of Hollywood dreams. His gowns graced icons like Grace Kelly and Jacqueline Kennedy, and his name became synonymous with glamour and elegance. But theming behind the fashion left his daughter Tina with a memory stitched in heartbreak. When Cassini died in 2006, his $52 million estate became the center of scandal. Tina discovered that most of her father's fortune had been left to his secretive widow, Marianne Nestor, while she had been pushed aside. Kirk Douglas. Kirk Douglas was a Hollywood titan, the star of Spartacus, and one of the last true Golden Age icons. His public life was full of triumph, but his final act carried a private sting for his own son. When Douglas passed in 2020, the world learned that his $61 million fortune would not go to his family. Instead, nearly every cent was pledged to charity through the Douglas Foundation. His eldest son, Michael Douglas, famous in his own right, received nothing directly. For Michael, it wasn't financial need that made the decision sting, it was the message. A father who had built an empire chose to leave his son outside the gates of inheritance. The world saw philanthropy and principle. The child saw distance carved in legal stone. In the end, Kirk Douglas's legendary name lived on through Hollywood and charity, but left his own bloodline with the ache of exclusion. Veronica Lake. Veronica Lake was the quintessential 1940s femme fatale, her iconic peekaboo hairstyle and sultry presence making her a Hollywood legend. On screen, she embodied glamour and confidence. Off-screen, her life and family relationships were marked by distance and disappointment. Lake married several times and had children, but her career struggles and personal battles often kept her from stable motherhood. By the late 1940s, her career began to decline due to a combination of changing public tastes, rumored difficult behavior on set, and personal issues. Financial struggles and alcoholism followed, creating an unstable home life for her children. One of her daughters, Elaine, later revealed that their relationship with Veronica was strained, with long periods of separation and emotional distance. Lake's constant movement between Hollywood, New York, and even brief periods of poverty left little room for the consistent presence her children needed. In her later years, Lake withdrew from the spotlight almost entirely. She lived in near anonymity, occasionally resurfacing with stories of the real Hollywood that had both made and broken her life. When she died in 1973 at the age of 50, she left behind a legacy of unforgettable film roles, but a family who had known her more as an absence than a mother. Hollywood may have glittered with fame, but behind the scenes, many families lived in the shadows of secrets the spotlight never revealed. Do you know of another vintage star whose parenting wasn't exactly picture perfect? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your take. If these shocking old Hollywood family revelations caught you off guard, be sure to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss more hidden stories from the golden age of cinema. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.